So here's what I want to talk about for logical reasoning. We're going to talk about top-down versus bottom-up. So basically, in logical reasoning, you have the passage, you have the question, and then you have the answer choices. And yeah, don't worry about the page number yet. You guys are all like, oh, which 16, which 16? It's okay. Let's just focus on this for a second. You have the passage, you have the question, you have the answer choices, and the question types, we've briefly talked about flaw questions and inference questions and strengthening questions. I mean, a lot of these question types, even though we haven't talked about them explicitly, you've encountered them for sure as you've gone through the sections. I would say there's 18 to 21 different question types depending on how you want to categorize them. That categorization does not matter so much. But all of them tend to fall into one of two categories, either top-down questions or bottom-up questions. Top-down questions ask you to assume that the passage is true. Bottom-up questions ask you to assume that the answer choices are true. That's the only difference. Okay, but it has a lot of implications. So let's talk about that for a second. I'm going to say a question to you, and then you tell me whether you think it's top-down or bottom-up. Which one of the following, if true, most weakens the argument above? That is bottom-up because it's asking you to assume that the 5 answer choices are true. Which one of the following, if true, which one of the following answers, if true, most weakens the argument above? All right, so it's a bottom-up type question, because you assume these are true, and then you see which one does the most damage to the passage. Okay? Which one of the following principles, if valid, most helps to justify the reasoning in the editor's argument? That's also bottom up, because which one of the following principles, if valid is the same as if true, is going to do the most to justify the editorial's reasoning? Okay. If the statements above are true, which one of the following must be true?
Top down.
That's top down. Okay? So the key difference here is that in top-down questions, the passage is asking you to assume that the passage is true, or the question is asking you to assume that the passage is true, and then you're trying to figure out what follows from that. So in general, the answer choices tend to be weak. Right? Because if I told you that most people in this room like ice cream, then if I said this, if that statement is true, which one of the following statements must be true? Well, saying something like at least one person in this room likes ice cream would be correct. Right? So when you're trying to figure out what follows or what must be true given what was said, you can always say what was said or less than what was said. But in a bottom-up question, like which one of the following, if true, most strengthens the argument above, you actually want stronger answers, right? Because which answer, if true, is going to do the most to strengthen? Well, you want strong evidence to come in and help your argument or weaken your argument. You don't want weak evidence. And what do I mean by strong versus weak? A strong answer would be something like, people always sleep in. That's strong because there's no exceptions. A weak answer would be something like, people sometimes sleep in. People usually sleep in. That would probably be strong. I mean, it depends on the context, but usually means most of the time. So it's stronger than sometimes.
So top down, you want a weaker answer?
In general, you want a weaker answer. Now, content always matters most. But in general, in top-down questions, the correct answer tends to be weak. In bottom-up questions, the correct answer tends to be strong. Now, I'm talking about these broad categories because if you can recognize that one question is either top-down or bottom-up, you don't necessarily have to know all the different types. You can just be like, oh, this is a bottom-up question, so in general, I'm going to want to do more or look for a strong answer. a lot of times what will happen is we might be doing a sufficient assumption question in class. And someone's like, oh, I didn't choose D, which was correct. I didn't choose D because it's so extreme. It's like, that's okay, that's good. That's good in a bottom-up question. Extreme answers that are strong and that are telling you what's going on is very good. Now that's bad. That's bad in a top-down question, but that's what we kind of want to start recognizing. This is why Kaplan, by the way, is so bad, because they just have this general advice that says, avoid extreme answers. It's like, yes, in some circumstances, but in other circumstances, extreme answers are actually probably good. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go through a section here and identify questions and just have you decide whether you think it's top down or bottom up, and then we'll go over them. So let me list that next here.